So another generic 4-step process sheet. This is 4-step process number 3, and we are now in chapter 8. So thinking back to yesterday, you took your one group. So in your one group, how many samples did your one group take? Your group took one sample, right? It had 5 people in there. So this is a one sample. We are creating, all of the work is to end up getting, we start with orange dot, we get blue lines, we end up with green dots. So the green dots make our what? Our interval. So this is a one sample confidence interval. And today we're going to start with means, which we work on for a couple days, and then we switch to proportions. And I'm doing my 2 colors like I usually do where I'll do fill and stuff. So state is kind of like our goal, objective. What are we doing? What are we trying to accomplish? What do we have? Our whole goal, what was our whole goal yesterday? Why did I take all of why did your group take your group's birthdays? Because we were trying to estimate what? Which was what? So you can write that in another color if you want, but I'm only writing this sheet for means. Does that make sense? So like eventually in this chapter we'll switch that where it's not means, but for this whole sheet is means. So whichever way you want to do that as far as same color, different color. Is the true mean in context. Oh. That's where I'll say, like, it's going to be the same for this whole sheet, but then towards the end of the chapter, we're going to switch to the proportion, and we're going to write a different page for it, but it can change, so I'm sure we'll run it. And then the last thing we need to know is with what percent confidence.
CL is confidence.
Yeah, confidence level, yeah. In our last four-step problems, what was the very first thing that we did in state? What was the very first thing we stated in state? Population. Am I doing that any different here? Am I still defining my population? Yes, it's just within the sentence instead. There's really no reason you can't do it one way or the other. For this one, we just have one sentence, so it's easier to just write it within. Plan. So we start with plan by defining what method we are going to use to solve this. And right now, method won't make much sense because you're like, well, that's just what you told us we're going to do. So of course that's what we're going to do. But eventually we're going to change those things. So right now we said this is a one sample. Eventually, chapters from now, we'll switch that to be a 2 sample. Z/T, Z or T. We don't know what T is right now. We're not going to talk about T today, but eventually that can be a T instead of a Z. But here we have to define why we chose which one. In our problem yesterday, you found your sample mean from your group because we didn't know what the population mean was, right? That was our whole goal. But what was the weird thing that I told you, hey, we know this, but why in the world would we ever know this? That we use? Standard deviation of the population. So if we know what sigma is, we're using Z. It's kind of one of those weird things about why in the world would I know sigma, but I wouldn't know mu. So eventually when we don't know what sigma is, which is more realistic, we won't be able to use Z, and we'll have to tweak that a little bit, but that's not today. That says is known/unknown. I don't know if you can read it on that block. Okay, so method is something new that we've added in, but what do we typically do in plan? 10% condition and normal condition. So in general, we're going to check our conditions. Writing check conditions isn't going to count off if you don't do it. But we end up asking a whole lot of questions like, what are the conditions? So I need you to understand the difference between which section is the conditions and which section isn't. So just making sure that you understand that piece of it. So this is part that we didn't have to add in last chapter yet because it was kind of implied. If I want to know GPAs for the whole school, and I am going to doing a sample, and I want to actually get a good idea of what the overall school's average GPA is, what would be a terrible way to take my sample?
Only in this class.
Only in this class. Why?
Because it's the AP class.
Because the AP class, and whether you want to say it or not, should be higher than the rest of the class, the rest of the school overall. So how should we do a sample?
Do it like at lunch.
Which means we want to make sure that we do and generally we want one that's what?
Not biased.
Not biased, we want one that's just what? Random. So we've been hinting at that word a lot throughout the year, but we've never really tied it into, hey, if I take a sample, it actually has to be, if otherwise my numbers don't make sense. We've kind of mentioned that here and there, but now we finally start connecting. Your data isn't going to be reliable unless it was actually random. And I'm kind of just writing words here. There are two different types of randomization that can occur. And within the last 5 years, AP exam has switched to require that you identify which one is which. We can either randomly, if I say you can randomly something, well, what's a fill in the blank there? We could randomly what? We could randomly select, random sample. If I am doing an experiment, what's another way that I could use random in there? Randomly assign. Randomly. Random selection versus random assignment. And you have to specify which. And that can be literally writing assignment versus selection. Like you literally write parentheses assignment or parentheses selection. So I still have haven't gotten to what we thought was going to be here. What's one of the things I thought was going to be here? What's the second thing you thought was going to be here? Normal. So we're kind of checking for normal again. We know two ways that we can check for normal right now. What's one way? So if we are dealing with means, stated that the, which one? Stated that the, there's a specific word. Which distribution? Population. And it might say approximately normal there. I heard somebody say, what's another way? Central limit theorem. And what is, very briefly, the central limit theorem? Which N? I had some people put capital N on midterm, but those people that surprised me, I think they're just going to that. Alright, so there's one that we haven't learned yet, which we still won't talk about yet today, probably. Is that a histogram of values ends up being fairly symmetric with no extreme outliers. Probably should have told y'all how much is going to be in here. We might have to break the side of it. That's fine. How do I have to end that section? So we can use normal approximation. All right, so what's the one that we haven't talked about yet that we thought would go there? 10% condition, and we are still using that. If you need to write like off to the right or whatever, you can. But now we call it independent. But it all independent is checking 10% condition. So how do I check 10% condition? Is what? And you're going to plug in numbers. And then how does my sentence start? There at least something. And some people last time just wrote there at least dot to dot, that's fine too. There are at least 10 individuals in the population. So we're taking what we had before with our normal condition, our independent condition. We're now adding the method that we used and the fact that it needed to be random. Alright, so do. In general, what happens in the do section? What do we typically do in the do section? Math. So we're just going to write down all the stuff that we do for math. Is it best to look at this slide? Alright, so let's talk about symbols that would be given to us. So like yesterday with your group, what's something we knew about your group? We knew our group's X bar. What's something else you knew about your group? So we either have to know S or sigma, which yesterday I gave you sigma. More often than not, in reality, we'd probably end up using S. So eventually what happens is you don't know the population standard deviation, so you have to use sample standard deviation to estimate it, and then we make an adjustment with that. What's the other thing you know about your group that you're overthinking right now, the easy part? N. And then there's another number that the problem is specifically going to give you, which is your confidence level. And we use that confidence level to find a what? Z-score or Z or T once we talk about what T is. Alright, so when we write out our equation, I'm going to write our equation in words first. We start with your group has one guess. Your group's one guess is your group's what? Point estimate. From your point estimate, we go left and we go right. So mathematically, how do I show that? In general, it's the blue line, and the blue line represents what? Margin of error. How do I find margin of error? Which is our critical value, our Z star or T star, which is our critical value, times our what? In general, the standard deviation of the statistic. So I'm going to go ahead and write what our two equations are. So yesterday, we started with what is our point estimate. Yesterday, what was our symbol for our point estimate? X bar. Yesterday, what did we use as our critical value? What letter? C star. We don't even know what T star is yet. And yesterday, what did I use to calculate the standard deviation of the statistic? So that's when I know what sigma is. If I don't know what sigma is, if I don't have a sigma, is that going to change my X bar? No, still going to have an X bar. If I don't know my sigma, I have to use T instead, which is what we talk about tomorrow. If I don't have my sigma, what is my best bet to use instead? S. If I don't have a sigma, am I still going to have an N? Yeah. So these are basically the same equation. It's just, this is the adjustment if I don't have sigma. And then so you're going to write your answer as, what symbol are we trying to estimate? So we are saying that mu falls between whatever our lower number and our upper number are. So we did the do section yesterday, yeah. Okay, so it's actually, when we do this, we have one over here and over here, which means it's gonna be plus and minus. But if I wrote plus minus z, I already have a plus minus here, and it gets really confusing. So the book just calls it star, which means I have one positive and one negative, and then we don't have to worry about like plus minus, and it gets really confusing. So technically, it's just at either side. Yeah. Alright, so this section is what we did yesterday. So now we have left conclude, which conclude is going to be a written part to memorize. But what do you think conclude is going to be? Where did we start today?
We started with confidence. So we're gonna use the interval one, which starts with.
We're looking for a confidence interval is what he said. So we're going to use the confidence interval one. So we're going to use the interpret sentence that we did from yesterday that is interpret the confidence interval. So this one that starts with we are. So we are, whatever our confidence level is, percent confident. That what? Which is the true, what word definitely is going to be passed there? And write whatever your context is. And then what? And it's where I'm going to write falls between your lower, including your units, and your upper, including units. So yesterday I wrote a question mark with units. I'm not writing a question mark today. Why? I'm dealing with mean, and mean always has units, even though sometimes we get into scenarios with the units are kind of weird, like score on SAT score or something. I would probably make a side note off to yourself that, hey, this is the interpret confidence interval. That's what that is. Because I know a lot of times when I'm teaching and talking, we're learning through things that things don't click. And all of a sudden you look back and like, oh, I didn't realize that. So I want to make a point that we know for a fact that that is the confidence, interpret the confidence interval sentence.
Should I say upper?
You did right, lower, yeah. Thank you. Can't talk and write at the same time. Yes, it should be between lower units and upper units. So even though this is the first 4 step that we've done, now writing one sentence for your state is new. We've never done method before. We've talked about random. We've done our independent. We've done our normal. We did all the work yesterday for do. Our conclude is the sentence that we did yesterday. So really, even though it is a brand new 4 step, there's really like 2 parts that are new to it.